Hello all and welcome to Silver Reportage, the inaugural episode, brought to you by CerebralIndustrialComplex.com. And today I wanted to talk to you guys about China. Now, the coin that you're looking at is obviously the Chinese Silver Panda. This is the 2013 edition, and I personally think that it's some of the most beautiful bullion available on the market, second possibly only to the stuff that the Perth Mint from Australia is putting out. But here you'll see the American Silver Eagle, which is a pretty coin in its own right, but I think that these two coins are almost analogous to the countries that they come from. Like America itself, the Silver Eagle's design is very old, very dated. It's from 1916. It was designed by a guy by the name of Adolf Weinman. Whereas the Chinese Silver Panda changes every single year. A new edition is released. It keeps the line of coins fresh, new, innovative. And it's clear to me, at least, that China is the future, whereas America is rapidly becoming a relic of the past, at the very best stagnant, and at the worst, steadily decaying, even rusting to a certain extent. So, the history of precious metals is the history of power. Gold and silver reserves have traditionally been viewed as a sort of national insurance policy. In fact, during the rise of the Third Reich, as Hitler started his escapade across Europe, one of the first things that he did, besides seizing fine art throughout the countries that he invaded, was going to central banks across Europe and taking their gold reserves. I'm going to play a clip for you guys from a recent CBC documentary called The Secret World of Gold that kind of goes into this a little bit, gives some contextual information to this.
Historian Duncan McDowell.
Countries with gold were countries that wouldn't be pushed around, that could fight wars, that could build up their economies. So this notion of gold as being the kind of foundation plate of national sovereignty was fundamental to the way the Western world saw itself.
Gold was a driving force in the Second World War. In late 1938, Austria welcomed Adolf Hitler as a conquering hero in the land of his birth. But the image of a powerful Führer cloaked a surprise weakness. Behind the scenes, the head of the German central bank has a bleak message for his leader. Hjalmar Schacht warns Hitler that Germany is bankrupt. Its gold is spent. Hitler fires him. But Hitler will soon go to war not only for territory, but for gold. In 1939, Hitler captures Austria and Czechoslovakia without firing a shot. A special Nazi unit seizes their gold. Next, the Germans invade Poland. Poland fights back. The Polish army and resistance are ordered to hold out long enough to get Poland's gold out of the country. 75 tons of gold, worth more than $2 billion today, are launched on a perilous journey through Romania, Turkey, and Lebanon, south and east, before arriving in France. But the gold would not be safe for long. In June 1940, Germany invades Luxembourg, Holland, Belgium, and France. The 14th of June, 1940, the Germans occupy Paris, which surrenders without a fight. The Nazi gold squad arrives here at the Bank of France, demanding the gold of France, all $3 billion worth. Bank of France historian Didier Brunel says they were met with a big surprise.
So, in our current monetary paradigm, who's got the gold? Who's got the silver? Who's got the power? Well, it's clear that Germany still has some, because they've recently repatriated their gold from the vaults of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. And China is clearly buying gold hand over fist. The United States, on the other hand, is buying cheap Chinese goods. We have a completely consumption-based economy here in America. This is by design. You'll note that most people in high positions of power who have a stake in our monetary future, whether it be Ben Bernanke at the Federal Reserve or department heads for major universities like Princeton University's Paul Krugman, these people are all Keynesian economists. Keynesian economics does not focus on the production of goods and tangible assets, things having intrinsic value. It's all about money sloshing through the pipes and the sluices. The movement of cash is what keeps the economy going in a Keynesian sense, the bull and the bear, the animal spirits. So once consumption ends, the American economy no longer functions. And I just wanted to play yet another quick clip for you guys showing this movement of cash and debt, quite frankly, from America to China and China back to America.
The development of China from backwater economic failure in the 1960s and 70s to today the second largest economy in the world has dramatically changed the Sino-American relationship through that time frame. The U.S. has devolved from the world's largest creditor nation to the world's largest debtor nation. Not without coincidence, our largest foreign creditor is China. So when we express concerns about the stability of the U.S. dollar or U.S. Treasury markets, it's only natural for us to consider in that conversation the U.S.'s largest foreign creditor. The symbiotic relationship between the U.S. and China has greatly benefited U.S. households by expanding the purchasing power of otherwise stagnant wages, while on the other hand benefiting China by increasing the workforce necessary to produce the goods available to us on retail shelves. As the U.S.-China trade relationship has improved, we've seen the foreign exchange reserves in China grow from $17 billion in 1994 to over $3 trillion today. These funds have been used to purchase GSEs, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, longer-dated treasuries, and more common today, shorter-dated treasuries. And this dollar recycling process, previously mentioned, has been one of the things that has held the dollar at such elevated levels.
So one thing that I thought was really interesting in that clip was the fact that China has stopped buying GSEs and long-dated treasuries and has moved to shorter-dated treasuries. And the only real reason that this would be happening, in my opinion at least, is because China wants to be able to leave this dollar paradigm, this debt paradigm, at their own will whenever they see fit by simply ceasing the purchase of American treasuries. So there's a huge difference right now between American and Chinese media, specifically investment media. And I'm going to demonstrate this for you by playing two clips. One is from CNBC's The Kudlow Report, and the other is from CCTV, which is Chinese state-run media. So the Kudlow Report clip, Peter Schiff is making an appearance, and he comes on every few months, essentially just to be beat up on by the guests and the hosts, despite the fact that Peter Schiff and other Austrian economists were among the few to predict the 2007 bursting of the housing bubble before it even happened, but I digress. The thing that's important to note here is that the advice given on these networks is completely contradictory from country to country. Why is this? Well, I think it's because China knows the dollar is a doomed currency, and they want their people completely and utterly prepared for what's coming. America, on the other hand, does not.
So we know gold has plunged about 25% from its peak in the middle of 2011, and it got crushed in recent days. I say that's a good omen for the economy, the dollar, and even the stock market. I like the sinking gold. Look, there's no end to the world scenario. There's no end to the world dollar. There's no end to the euro. There's no inflation. And energy independence could curb our trade deficit, bolstering King Dollar, and bring gold down even more. Remember the fabulous stock market and economic prosperity of the 80s and 90s? Remember? Gold was crushed then. Maybe we're moving in that direction right now. Think of it. Anyway, here to debate, Dave Goldman, former head of fixed income research at Bank of America. He's currently president of Macro Strategy. And we welcome back Peter Schiff, CEO of Euro Pacific Capital and the author of The Real Crash, How to Save Yourself and Your Country. And anyway, let me go right to Peter Schiff. Peter, you probably don't agree with my prognostication that falling gold is a good thing and there's more of it. So tell me where you come out.
Well, first of all, Larry, thanks for having me back on. It's been a while. And by the way, I read your piece on the fall in the gold price. And while I agree with your sentiments, I completely disagree with your conclusion. When the price of gold did plunge in 1980, that was a good sign because Paul Volcker did the right thing. But Ben Bernanke is no Paul Volcker. I mean, I know Paul Volcker. He may not be a personal friend of mine, but I have met him. And Bernanke is not Paul Volcker. Everything he has done since the 2008 financial crisis has simply made the situation worse. And President Obama is no Ronald Reagan. It's not a repeat of 2008. Maybe it's a repeat of 1980, rather. It might be a repeat of 1976 or more recently 2008 when gold did go down by 35%, but it was a buying opportunity. And I think this decline will prove to be an even better buying opportunity.
All right, appreciate that. Dave Goldman, you heard Peter Schiff. How do you react to that?
I think that the key issue here is that gold is not an investment but an insurance policy against the collapse of the dollar. When your cost of insurance goes down, it means you're healthier. The Chicken Little scenario, Larry, is that we run trillion-dollar deficits. We borrow nearly half of that from foreigners. They'll stop lending us money, or at least not at low rates, and we'll crash. Now, that's not going to happen. Because of the energy boom, we're going to have the first trade surplus in a generation by 2020 as things are going. And that means we can finance these deficits as far as the eye can see. Doesn't mean the economy isn't weak. We will have the deficits. The good news is our credit's going to be good. The rest of the world will keep lending us money at low interest rates, and that's a net big plus for the stock market.
Peter Schiff's an interesting take that David Goldman has used, and I've given him a hat tip for it. Energy independence, we don't have to import from the Saudis or, other people. We'll probably be exporting too. The trade balance may even go into surplus. That would be good for the dollar, and that in turn would really crush gold. I mean, that's a strong dollar, not the Volcker way, Peter, as you pointed out, but through this energy story.
Well, first of all, the dollar traded at a 6-week low today versus other fiat currencies, and we still have $500 billion a year trade deficit. So I don't think we're going to resolve that simply with the extra energy production. It feels pretty good right now, right? The Fed is spiking the punch bowl with all this monetary alcohol. But the problem is when the hangover wears off, we're not going to be able to convince the world to keep lending us money at ultra low interest rates. Rates are going to go up, and when that happens, the party is over because the economy, which is so strung out on cheap money, cannot afford higher interest rates. That's why all this talk about tightening is a bluff.
Peter, for 20 years, people have been saying the Japanese government bond market would crash, but Japan, which has a trade surplus every year, keeps financing its debt with a 10-year now below 0.5%. As long as you've got a trade surplus, your credit is good and you can keep financing it. That's what the Japanese case tells us. Doesn't mean we have a boom, but it means we don't have to insure ourselves against that crashing downside scenario.
But we don't have a trade surplus. Well, I don't understand your point. We have the exact opposite of a trade surplus. We have a massive deficit.
Well, we had a 6% of GDP deficit in 2006. It's now 3% of GDP. And if some of the economists' projections are correct, we go into surplus by 2020. That's what the market thinks. It could go wrong, and I wouldn't sell all my gold at this point. But the way the market is going, we are likely to have a trade surplus or at least a de minimis deficit, and that means our international credit is going to be terrific, and there's no dollar crash.
Peter Schiff, let me just ask you, look, there's been an awful lot of pessimism, and I've been a critic of Ben Bernanke, but it's just interesting to me, and I want to get your reaction. The big inflation never came. The total collapse of the dollar never came. In fact, the dollar against broad trade-weighted indexes is about where it was 4 or 5 years ago. It's gone up and down, hasn't really moved. There's pumping of the money supply. Most of the banks didn't use the reserves, and the inflation rate, heck, today, I think the year-on-year CPI, 1.3%. In other words, a lot of the doom and gloom, collapse of the dollar, collapse of the euro, soaring American inflation, therefore collapse of the dollar and collapse of the American system. It just seems like, Peter, that kind of pessimism and catastrophic pessimism never really happened, and now gold has completely lost its leg because it traded on that catastrophic pessimism.
Well, you know, it hasn't happened yet, but I think it's premature to say that it's not going to happen. If you remember, gold actually performed better before the 2008 financial crisis than it did after the 2008 financial crisis. It's all about the money printing. The money printing is going to continue. The inflation is there. It's there in assets right now. It's in the bond market. It's in the stock market. It's back in the real estate market. The money is being printed. That is the definition of inflation. We are expanding the money supply. I don't care what the government claims with their doctored up CPI numbers. Prices are rising. Everybody who shops knows that. But eventually you're going to see much higher increases in consumer prices. The government isn't going to be able to hide that with the CPI, and the Fed is going to be in a box. It's going to have to either raise interest rates or admit that they can't, but one way or another, we're going to have this dollar crisis. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
All right, I hear you. I know that's your point of view, and I respect your point of view. All I'm saying is I've heard this story for several years. I myself have occasionally participated in the inflation story, and frankly, I've been wrong. Well, I was wrong again today with the CPI. Dave Goldman, let me ask you.
You're not wrong.
Dave Goldman, gold $13.50, $13.70 today after this big breakdown. Is gold going to $100? I mean, $1,000, or is gold going to $2,000? I'll give you that range. Gold going to $1,000 or to $2,000? Which is more likely, Dave Goldman?
More likely is $1,000, which is roughly the marginal cost of production. $2,000 if the Federal Reserve slips up, or we have a giant Middle East war, or 10 other things that could go wrong. You don't sell off your insurance policy, but you don't look at gold as an investment. As for the inflation story, Larry, who do you know who wants to take cash out of the bank and own hard assets? Own brick and mortar, factories, commodities. People are still hoarding cash. We're still in a global deleveraging. So the inflation story makes no more sense now than it did in Japan for a long time.
I think you're right. I got to tell you, my bias, there's so much risk avoidance by companies, by individuals, by banks. There's so much deleveraging going on that what Bernanke does is being swallowed up by people who are cash hungry. And the gold argument, which might have had merit years ago, doesn't seem to have merit anymore. It's a different ballgame. But, Peter Schiff, I hear you. I understand your point of view. I appreciate you coming on. David Goldman.
Hey, Larry.
Good to see you. Yes, last one. Go ahead.
Gold may very well go to, it might go to 1,000 and 2,000, but if it goes to 1,000 first, you better buy it because it'll go to 2,000 afterwards and beyond.
All right, I hear you. I might buy it at 500.
Betting on the end of the world won't make you money.
Peter Schiff, David
It's not
Goldman.
the end of the world, but it
gentlemen.
is a big drop in the...
Tuesday's first ever investment opportunity for silver bullion. The bars are available in 500 grams, 1 kilogram, 2 kilograms, and 5 kilograms with a purity of 99.9%. Figures show that gold was 50 times more expensive than silver in 2007, but now that figure has reached over 70 times, the highest in the past 5 years. Analysts say that silver has been undervalued in recent years. They add that the metal is a wise investment for individual investors and could be a good way to cash in.
We are the first to offer silver bullion as an investment opportunity. The price for the first batch of the bullion is set very low, close to the cost of the raw material. The investment threshold is not high, and it is more suitable for the general public. Silver is much cheaper than gold.
So, I believe it was Epic RV recently did a video in which he recited a quote, and I think it's really telling and applicable to this situation. I'm going to recite it for you now. A smart man makes a mistake, learns from it, and never makes that mistake again. But a wise man finds a smart man and learns from him how to avoid the mistake altogether. China, in this instance, is the smart man, and America is neither smart nor wise. Paper currency, not a lot of people know this, but paper currency did not originate in the West. It did not originate with Jewish banking oligarchs, but it originated in the East from China in the Sung dynasty. And the first historical case of hyperinflation also originated from China in the Sung dynasty. Daryl Robert Shun, who has a channel here on YouTube, does a great job really laying this out for you, so I'm going to let him speak now.
He tells them the same story. Oh, they did this. They ran out of copper coins. They came up with these other coins, all right, and they had to come up with receipts to substitute for them, and so that's what they did. And the receipts began passing as money, and they printed too many, and all of a sudden we had trouble. And the Sung Dynasty mandarins go, oh, this is what happened, huh? Well, shortly thereafter, the Sung Dynasty issued an edict. No paper money can be issued by any agency except the Sung Dynasty. All right? Within 2 years, the Sung Dynasty started printing their own paper money. And they said, this is money. All right? Just like it happened in Sichuan province. Now, in Sichuan province, the money had been backed by iron coins. Well, the Sung Dynasty was a lot richer. These were the boys with all the money. But they knew the advantage of paper money. If you could leverage it. Instead of using valuable gold and silver, you could print a lot more paper. But they knew what happened when you printed too much. All hell broke loose. So they decided, we're just going to print enough. All right? Now, as a historical fact, the Sung Dynasty backed their paper currency with approximately 29% gold and silver. All right? 29% of it was backed by gold and silver. So there was, quote, backing for this paper money. Now, perhaps you could take that money, and let's say you were going to go to a place that outside of China and you needed to take gold and silver, you could take your money in and they'd give you gold and silver for your pieces of paper that you had, your paper money, all right? But they knew they didn't have to print one-to-one because not everybody was going to ask for their money. Only a few. So they only had to print, and the rest was free. To who? It was free to the Sung Dynasty. Everybody else traded those pieces of paper as if they had 100% backing of gold or silver. The Sung Dynasty that issued them bought 3 times as much than they should have if they was using gold and silver. All right? So you see the advantage of gold and silver to the dynasty, to the government. To everybody else, there was no advantage. All right? And as we will find out, there was a severe disadvantage. Because what happened to the Sung Dynasty within 100 years, they kept printing more of those pieces of paper as they wanted to do and buy more things. And generally, going to war. War is very expensive. So the Sung Dynasty found out, oh, pay the soldiers. Here. Buy some spears, arrows, fireworks. Here. And pretty soon, they were spending paper money like it was paper. Inflation happened in the Sung Dynasty just like it did in the province of Sichuan, and the dynasty collapsed, just like the Sichuan local government collapsed.
So, as you can see, China is learning from its own history. China's the smart man. America, on the other hand, has plenty of historical examples of hyperinflation, from the Sung Dynasty to Zimbabwe to the Weimar Republic, and either does not see its folly or is deliberately engineering a crash of the American dollar to potentially bring in a world currency or a regional currency to consolidate power. But a lot of people, especially physical silver investors in the West, talk about the coming disconnect between the paper price of silver, things like ETFs, and the physical price. And some would argue that since the April 15th smackdown of silver, that's happening right now. China, on the other hand, knows that the Western markets are rigged. They don't care about what happens on the COMEX. They don't care about what happens in New York and London as it pertains to the price of gold and silver, because silver right now in China can't be found at even near spot price. Premiums are completely through the roof. There's a YouTube user by the name of Camouflage who's an American living in Shanghai and is also a physical silver purchaser. who really spells this out in his based on his conversations with bullion dealers in China. And I'm going to play for you now what he has to say about the matter.
So these are the ICBC. This one cost me, this is the iPad stuff. So this cost me 650 yen. 650 yen is almost exactly $100. So it was $100 for 50 grams of silver. The premium is fucknificent high. This one here, this is like 100 grams of silver, and this cost me a hefty sum of 1,500 renminbi. That's around $250 for 100 grams. So as you can see, the Chinese are not paying any attention to the paper price. They're just setting their own price. I even had the banker from ICBC tell me that the paper price doesn't matter. They go by their own price.
So, no doubt some of you may be thinking now, you know, like, I need to learn Mandarin right now. Jump ship. Get the hell out of Dodge. But all is not well in the East. I'm not referring to China's egregious human rights violations, nor their rampant environmental destruction, or their complete lack of political freedoms, although these are very prescient issues these will be very prescient issues going forward in China. What I am talking about is China facing the exact same problem that America faced in 2007, and that is the bursting of a massive real estate bubble. So China is actually rapidly erecting empty cities throughout the country. Now, these are not centers of employment like the Chinese government originally anticipated them to be. They have their cities built for millions of people that in some cases have only tens of thousands of occupants. They're very reminiscent of places like Detroit and Cleveland. China's hope is that they would be centers for industrial activity, manufacturing jobs, and to entice farmers and the agrarian population to come work in the cities, much like the move of agrarian populations to cities at the turn of the 20th century here in America. But that's simply not panning out the way that the Chinese government originally anticipated. And because of this, some of these cities that have, again, no occupants, the physical infrastructure is actually beginning to decay. They're literally rotting from within.
China's economy is growing fast, thanks in part to a real estate boom and government projects. But with the construction comes the question, are these projects truly sustainable? Bloomberg's Adam Johnson traveled to China, and here is part one of his special series, Behind the Wall.
Bullet trains, highways, apartment buildings. They're all part of a massive infrastructure effort aimed at turning China into the world's manufacturing hub. Entire cities are being created, often in the middle of nowhere.
This is Kumbashi. It was built by the government to accommodate about 1 million people, trying to get people to move out of the crowded cities to come here, but they haven't really come yet. There are only about 30,000 residents.
This brand new city in the middle of the desert has more than $160 billion in government buildings alone. It's part of China's 5-year plan to build 36 million affordable apartments and move workers from farms to factories. A local construction company vice chairman with millions on the line told me he'd already recouped his costs by pre-selling apartments during construction.
The government has some policies, including costs. The government has been very supportive, very supportive.
That support comes in the form of subsidies keeping construction on course. And if it takes a decade to turn a profit, the vice chairman is fine with that too. But China's rapid expansion isn't without skeptics, Legendary short seller Jim Chanos calls them ghost cities. He estimates there could be as many as 20 others, adding to a real estate bubble of epic proportion.
People haven't wanted to think that the Chinese growth miracle might not have as much to it as they originally thought.
Another problem? Maintenance. With no occupants, paint peels, roofs leak, and gleaming assets become glaring liabilities. Still, the development shows no signs of stopping. China's investment in real estate rose 34% to $203 billion just in the first 4 months of this year. If it's a bubble, it's not likely to pop for quite some time. Adam Johnson, Bloomberg, Kumbasha, China.
Now, China has no central bank, but they do certainly have central planning. And these ghost cities are a result of this central planning run completely amok. And another problem that China is going to have going forward is their complete population imbalance between the ratio of males to females. Nearly 70% of China's population now is male, and this is again a result of central planning gone completely awry. During the Great Leap Forward and Mao Zedong's one-child policy, families in China, because China's model of communism was agrarian, it was an agricultural form of communism, families would literally murder their children until they got a boy, because boys are better farmhands. So as a result of this, China physically doesn't have enough women to replace their outgoing population, and that's, again, going to be a huge issue for them going forward, and it's going to be an even bigger issue in populating these ghost cities. So I'm going to end on this note. Earlier, we talked about how China holds a large percentage of U.S. debt. Where does America get the money to pay back these foreign nations, like China? I'm going to allow the brilliant and articulate Stefan Molyneux to explain. And earlier, I stated that America wants its citizens potentially unprepared for economic calamity, or at least, at the very least, is not preparing them adequately through media and government. So I think this clip does an excellent job of really laying to bear exactly what and how the ruling class of America, the proverbial 1%, the government, and leaders of very influential institutions think about you. And again, keep Mr. Molyneux's words in your mind going forward when you're thinking about the future of this country and the future of the geopolitical stage at large. I want to thank you guys for listening to this first episode. If you want to see the source documents for some of the things that I talk about, they will all be listed on my website, www.cerebralindustrialcomplex.com. And if you want to consume some more alternative media that's like this, kind of delving into topics that aren't covered on the mainstream media nearly as much as they should be, again, check it out. I'd really appreciate it. So thank you so much for listening.
The state of the union is not good.
Our trade deficit is too large.
We must not go back to unwise spending.
This is America.
George Orwell once wrote that the great enemy of clear language is insincerity. When there is a gap between one's real and one's declared aims, one turns, as it were, instinctively to long words and exhausted idioms, like a cuttlefish spurting out ink. You've probably heard confusing phrases like the trade deficit, the falling dollar, the national debt, unfunded liabilities, and so on, which all sound vague and actuarial and vaguely, well, not me. The reality behind these accounting phrases is perfectly monstrous. When someone, a foreigner say, loans money to the American government, what are they getting in return? Well, they are getting promises of interest payments and eventual repayment of the principal. Where does your government get this money? The government is not a business. It does not generate profits in the free market. So where does it get the money to repay its creditors? Are you beginning to understand that it is not dollars that are being sold, or bonds, or agency debt, or treasuries, or anything like that? Where is your government going to get the money to pay off its creditors? It's not pieces of paper, or contracts, or computer bits that are being sold. There is only one thing that the government has to sell. Governments have only one asset that they can use as collateral. Your leaders are selling you. When China lends $800 billion to your government, what they get in return is a guarantee that $10,000 plus interest will be taken from your family at gunpoint and shipped overseas. When a farmer gets a loan from a bank, he uses his livestock as collateral. It is the milk and meat his cows will produce in the future that he will use to pay off his loan. The bank is buying a share in his cows. You are the livestock that your leaders use as collateral. The leaders that you cheer for and throw parades for and drop balloons behind and donate money to are selling you to Chinese rulers, to the Japanese, to the Nigerians, to South American drug lords with accounts in the Caribbean banking centers, to Russia, to Korea, to Egypt, to Colombia, to Chile, to the Philippines, to Malaysia, and anyone else who is willing to give them a few dollars in return for the blood, sweat, and toil of your future. The flag that you praise and the anthems that you sing and the rulers that you weep and kneel before have as much loyalty to you as a plantation owner had to his slaves. And sadly, plantation slaves had more pride than we do. Plantation slaves did not generally praise their masters for selling them off, for auctioning off the lives, hopes, dreams, and futures of their own little children. We can understand that cattle may lick the hand of the farmer who lowers an axe to its neck, because cattle are dumb beasts that cannot comprehend their real relationship with the farmer and his imminent plans for them. What is our excuse? When we chant, USA, 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 when we cheer and bow and beg and scrape and sing and weep with joy that some new farmer now presides over the wholesale dismantling and sale of our family's futures, when we love with obsessive emptiness the leaders who laugh while they auction us off to every tin pot dictator and stockbroker the world over, what is our excuse? Has our pride been so broken that we lunge with pathetic joy at every new silver-tongued demagogue who pretends to care for us even a tiny little bit? In the future, our children will demand to know why we knelt and cheered as they were sold off on the auctioneer's block. This video, and my life's work, is my answer to my child. What's yours?